I never thought a simple piece of candy would reunite me with my father after 15 years of believing he was dead. I was just 7 years old when the social workers told me my parents had died in an accident. For 15 years, I lived in foster homes, struggled through school working odd jobs, and eventually found myself on the streets, selling handmade candy to survive. Little did I know that my specialty, lemon drops with a hint of lavender, would lead me back to my past. I'd created this recipe, trying to recreate a taste from my childhood, a faint memory of something sweet my father used to give me while singing a lullaby. I never imagined that one day, a well-dressed man would stop at my humble sidewalk stand, freeze at the sight of my candy, and change my life forever. I remember that day like it was yesterday, a crisp autumn morning with leaves swirling around my little candy cart. Business had been slow, and I was considering packing up early when I noticed him, tall, distinguished, wearing a suit that probably cost more than everything I owned. At first, I thought he was just another businessman rushing past, but then he stopped abruptly, almost like he'd seen a ghost. His eyes weren't on me, but fixed on the little sign I'd hand-painted, Lavender Lemon Drops, a taste of childhood. I smiled politely, used to being invisible to people like him, and asked if he'd like to try one. What happened next still gives me chills when I think about it. He didn't speak at first, just stared at the candies with an intensity that made me uncomfortable. His hand trembled slightly as he reached for his wallet, and I noticed an expensive watch peeking out from under his sleeve, definitely a Millionaire or something close to it. "How much for all of them?" he asked, his voice strangely hoarse. I laughed nervously, thinking he was joking. Who buys out an entire candy stand? But his expression remained serious, almost desperate. I quickly calculated in my head. It wasn't much to him probably, but it would cover my rent for the month. $37 for everything, I said, trying to sound professional despite my surprise. He pulled out a $100 bill without hesitation, told me to keep the change, and carefully picked up one of the candies. The way he examined it, turning it over in his fingers, you'd think it was a precious gem rather than a homemade sweet that cost pennies to make. I watched, confused, as this wealthy stranger closed his eyes and inhaled the scent of my simple candy, a strange expression crossing his face, something between pain and longing. When he finally tasted it, I wasn't prepared for his reaction. The candy had barely touched his lips when his eyes snapped open, filled with tears. I stood there awkwardly, not knowing what to say. Had I accidentally made him sick? Was he allergic to something in the recipe? But then he asked me a question that seemed to come out of nowhere. "Where did you learn to make these?" His voice was barely above a whisper, intense and urgent. I shrugged and explained that I'd been trying to recreate something from my childhood, a specialty my father used to make. His next question caught me completely off guard. "What was your father's name?" he asked, studying my face with an unsettling intensity. I felt a chill run down my spine. Why would this stranger care about my father's name? For a moment, I considered lying, suddenly worried about his intentions. But something in his expression, a desperate hope, made me answer truthfully. "David," I said. "David Mitchell. But he died when I was 7. The Millionaire's reaction was immediate and bewildering. He stepped back as if I'd struck him, the color draining from his face. "That's impossible," he whispered. "What was your mother's name?" "Sarah," I replied cautiously, increasingly uncomfortable with this interrogation. "Sarah Mitchell." The man's breathing became shallow, and for a moment, I worried he might collapse right there on the sidewalk. "And your name?" he asked, his voice trembling. When I told him, his eyes widened in shock. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone, his fingers shaking so badly he could barely operate it. "I need to show you something," he said, scrolling frantically through his photos. I took a step back, ready to pack up and leave if this got any weirder. But then he turned the screen toward me, and my entire world shifted. There on his phone was a family photo, a man, a woman, and a little girl with a distinctive heart-shaped birthmark on her right wrist. I unconsciously touched the same mark on my own wrist, hidden under my bracelet. The little girl was undeniably me, maybe 5 or 6 years old. The woman was my mother, younger than I remembered her, but unmistakable. And the man holding me in the picture, looked like a younger version of the millionaire standing before me, tears now freely streaming down his face. "This isn't possible," I whispered, my knees suddenly weak. "They told me both my parents died in a car crash." The man, could he really be my father? Shook his head vehemently. "No, no, that's what they wanted you to believe. That's what they told me too, that you and your mother had died. I've been searching for 15 years. His voice broke, and he had to take a moment to compose himself. I stood frozen, unable to process what he was saying. My parents weren't dead. Someone had lied to us both. Why would anyone do such a thing? The world around us seemed to fade away. The busy street, the passing pedestrians, my little candy cart, all of it disappeared as I stared at this stranger who might be my father. "I don't understand," I managed to say, my voice barely audible. "Who would do this? Why would they separate us?" He took a deep breath, glancing around nervously as if worried about being overheard. "It's complicated," he said, "and dangerous. We shouldn't talk here." He handed me a business card with an address scribbled on the back. "Can you meet me here in 2 hours? I'll explain everything, I promise." I should have been more cautious. Meeting a stranger, no matter how convincing his story or how much he looked like the father I barely remembered, was risky. But the photo on his phone, the birthmark that matched mine, the way he reacted to my candy, it all felt too specific to be a coincidence. Plus, I'd been alone for so long, bouncing between foster homes, never belonging anywhere. The possibility of finding my family, of discovering my whole life, had been built on a lie. It was too powerful to ignore. I nodded slowly. 2 hours, I agreed, already wondering what I was getting myself into. Those 2 hours were the longest of my life. I paced my tiny apartment, examining the business card he'd given me. Alexander Mitchell, CEO of Mitchell Enterprises. The company name sounded vaguely familiar. I'd probably seen it on buildings or in news headlines. If this man really was who he claimed to be, he wasn't just wealthy. He was in another stratosphere of rich, which made the whole situation even more confusing. If my father was a millionaire or billionaire, why had I spent my childhood in poverty, shuffled between foster homes, eventually ending up homeless for a time? I pulled out the only photo I had of my parents, a worn, creased image I'd managed to hold on to through all the moves and upheavals of my life. The faces were faded, but looking at it now, comparing it to the photo on Alexander's phone, I couldn't deny the similarities. Same eyes, same smile lines, same way of tilting his head slightly. Still, doubt crept in. Maybe this was an elaborate scam. Maybe he'd somehow found out about my past and was using it to manipulate me. For what purpose, I couldn't imagine, but the world had taught me to be suspicious. In the end, curiosity won out over caution. I showered, put on the nicest clothes I owned, which weren't very nice at all, and headed to the address he'd given me. It was in the wealthiest part of the city, an area I rarely visited since I could barely afford to window shop there. The building was imposing, all glass and steel, with a doorman in a crisp uniform who eyed me suspiciously as I approached. I showed him the business card, half expecting to be turned away, but his demeanor changed immediately. "Miss Mitchell," he said respectfully, "Mr. Mitchell is expecting you. Penthouse floor." The elevator ride gave me time to doubt my decision again. What if this was some kind of trap? What if he wasn't who he claimed to be? But when the doors opened directly into a stunning penthouse apartment with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city, all those thoughts temporarily faded. Alexander, if that's who he really was, stood by a large dining table, which he'd set with fine china and crystal. Next to him was an elderly woman I didn't recognize, who gasped audibly when she saw me. "My God, Alex, she looks just like Sarah," the woman whispered, bringing her hands to her mouth. "This is Martha," Alexander explained, gesturing to the woman. "She was our housekeeper when you were little. I thought having someone else who knew you might help convince you I'm telling the truth." Martha approached me slowly, her eyes taking in every detail of my face. "The same eyes," she murmured. "And look," she gently took my hand, turning it to reveal my birthmark. "The little heart, just like your mother's." She pulled out a handkerchief and dabbed at her eyes. "We thought you're dead, child. All these years." Alexander invited me to sit, and Martha poured tea with shaking hands. On the table was a small music box, which seemed out of place among the elegant settings. "Before I explain everything," Alexander said, "I want to give you this." He pushed the music box toward me. It was old, with chipped paint and a faded pattern of flowers around its edges. Something about it tugged at my memory, though I couldn't place why. "Open it," he encouraged, his voice gentle. I hesitated, then lifted the lid. A familiar melody began to play, one that had haunted my dreams for years. Tears sprang to my eyes before I even understood why. My fingers traced the outline of the box as the music played on. "This was mine," I whispered, the realization hitting me like a physical blow. Alexander nodded, his own eyes glistening. "I gave it to you for your 5th birthday. You used to ask me to wind it up every night before bed, and I'd sing along with it while you fell asleep." The melody continued, each note bringing back fragments of memories I'd thought were lost forever. Being tucked in a bed, a deep voice singing softly, feeling completely safe and loved. Martha placed a photo album on the table, opening it to show pictures of a happy family. My family. Me as a baby, as a toddler, as a young child. My mother's radiant smile, her arms around me. Alexander, my father, younger and more carefree, but unmistakably the same man who stood before me now. "We were so happy," he said softly, "until the threats started." He turned the page to a newspaper clipping about Mitchell Enterprises' expansion into international markets. I was closing a deal that would have put some very powerful, very dangerous people out of business. "They threatened to hurt you and your mother," he continued, his voice hardening. "At first, I hired security, thought I could protect you. But then there was an incident, a car following you to school, a man taking pictures of you in the playground." He closed his eyes briefly, as if the memory still caused him pain. "The police couldn't do anything. These people were too connected, too powerful. So I made arrangements with a federal marshal I trusted. You and your mother would go into hiding, new identities, new lives, until I resolved the situation. The plan was for me to join you a few months later." His hands clenched into fists as he continued. "But something went wrong. The day you were supposed to leave, there was an accident. At least, that's what I was told. The car taking you and your mother to the safe house crashed. I was shown photos of the wreckage, told there were no survivors." He looked up at me, his eyes reflecting years of grief. "I buried empty coffins. I mourned you both for 15 years. I never stopped looking, though, hiring private investigators, following up on every possible lead. But there was never anything to find, until today." "But I don't understand," I said, my mind reeling. "If you were told we died, what happened to us actually? And why was I told you both died?" Alexander's expression darkened. "That's what I've spent the afternoon trying to figure out. I made some calls, called in some favors. The marshal who arranged everything, James Reeves, he died 10 years ago. Supposedly from a heart attack, though now I'm wondering if that's true." He showed me a document on his tablet. "This is the accident report. It states that Sarah Mitchell and her daughter died at the scene, bodies badly burned, identified by personal effects. But obviously, that wasn't the case," I said, trying to piece together this bizarre puzzle. "If we weren't in that car, who was? And where was my mother taken?" Martha, who had been quietly listening, spoke up. "Your mother's wedding ring was found in the wreckage. She never took it off, never. Someone must have taken it from her." The implication hung heavy in the air. If someone had taken my mother's ring, what had they done to her? I felt sick at the thought, but forced myself to focus on the facts we had. "I was told I was found alone at the scene of an accident," I said. "That both my parents had died on impact, and that I was taken to the hospital with minor injuries before entering foster care. I have medical records from that hospital stay." I pulled out my phone, showing him the documents I'd requested years ago when trying to learn more about my past. Alexander studied them, shaking his head in disbelief. "These are forgeries," he said finally. "Excellent ones, but I know the doctor whose signature is on these papers. He worked for me for years, and he confirmed to me this afternoon that he never treated you. Someone went to extraordinary lengths to separate us," Alexander continued, his voice tense with controlled anger. "To make me believe you were dead, and to make you believe I was dead. The question is, who had that kind of power and influence? And why? He pulled out another file. What I do know is that 3 months after your death, the deal I was working on collapsed. I was too devastated to fight back when my competitors moved in. Someone made billions when my company's stock plummeted. I always thought it was just business, but now I felt overwhelmed, trying to absorb all this information. My entire life had been a lie, orchestrated by unknown forces for reasons I still didn't fully understand. And my mother, where was she? Was she alive somewhere, believing both her husband and daughter were dead? Or had something more sinister happened to her? I looked at Alexander, my father, and saw the same questions reflected in his eyes. We need to find out what really happened, I said finally. We need to find my mother. He nodded, a determined expression replacing his grief. Yes, and I have the resources to do it. He reached across the table, hesitantly offering his hand. Will you help me? I took his hand, feeling an instant connection that transcended the years of separation. Where do we start? I asked, suddenly energized despite the emotional roller coaster of the day. Alexander's expression became focused, the grief giving way to determination. I've already started, he said. While waiting for you to arrive, I contacted every private investigator and security specialist I trust. They're gathering information as we speak. He showed me his phone, scrolling through dozens of messages. We have resources now that weren't available 15 years ago. Facial recognition software, database access, social media tracking. Martha brought us coffee as Alexander laid out what he'd learned so far. The accident report lists the location as Highway 16 near the Johnson Creek Bridge. My team is accessing traffic camera footage from that day, though after 15 years, it's proving difficult. He paused, looking at me intently. What's your earliest memory after the supposed accident? Do you remember a hospital, social workers, anything that might give us a clue? I closed my eyes, try to recall those foggy days that had always been so painful to revisit. I remember being in a room with white walls. I said slowly. Not a hospital room, more like an office. A woman with red hair was telling me that my parents were in heaven now, and that I needed to be brave. The memory brought unexpected tears. I remember asking for my music box, and she said all my things had been destroyed in the fire. I cried so much they gave me a sedative. Alexander made notes as I spoke, his jaw tight with barely contained anger. Any names you remember? Locations? Details about the first foster home? I shook my head. The first few months are a blur. I was heavily medicated for trauma, they said. My first clear memory is from about 6 months later in my second foster home. I hesitated, not wanting to burden him with the difficulties I'd faced, but knowing the information might be important. The Hendersons. They weren't kind. I ran away twice, but they always found me. They were receiving special payments for my care above the normal foster stipend. I overheard them talking about it once. Alexander's expression darkened. Special payments? From whom? I shrugged helplessly. I don't know. They just referred to it as the arrangement. They were always careful not to say too much around me. Martha, who had been listening intently, suddenly spoke up. The Hendersons, wasn't it the name of the family who lived next door to James Reeves? Alexander's head snapped up. You're right. Robert and Julia Henderson. He was a police officer. She was a nurse. I met them at one of Reeves' barbecues. He turned to me, excitement in his eyes. This is our first real connection. Within the hour, Alexander's penthouse had transformed into an operations center. 3 security specialists had arrived, setting up laptops and making calls. A digital map displayed on a large screen showed various locations marked with pins, the site of the alleged accident, the address of the Hendersons' home, James Reeves' former residence. I watched in amazement as my father directed his team with the confidence of someone used to handling crises. Run background checks on everyone associated with Reeves, he instructed. Financial records, travel history, phone records if you can get them. While they worked, Alexander showed me around the penthouse. This was supposed to be your home, he said softly as we entered a bedroom that had clearly been designed for a child. The walls were painted a soft yellow, your favorite color," he explained. And though the furniture had been updated for an adult, certain elements remained from years ago. Bookshelves filled with children's classics, a collection of stuffed animals carefully preserved on a window seat, framed drawings signed in a child's wobbly handwriting. "I could never bring myself to change it completely," he admitted. "Some part of me always hoped." I picked up one of the stuffed animals, a worn plush elephant with one ear slightly darker than the other. "Mr. Trunks," I whispered, the name coming to me from nowhere. Alexander's eyes widened. "You remember him?" I nodded, running my fingers over the familiar texture. "I used to pretend he was my protector, keeping bad dreams away." The memory was so clear suddenly, placing the elephant beside my pillow each night, telling him my secrets. I had dreams about him for years after I thought you died. I always wondered why an elephant felt so important to me. We were interrupted by one of the security specialists calling for Alexander. "Sir, we found something." We hurried back to the main room, where a woman was pointing to a document on her screen. "Julia Henderson died 3 years ago, but Robert is still alive. He retired from the police force 10 years ago and now lives in Florida. More interestingly, he received a series of large deposits to an offshore account between 2005 and 2011, approximately $50,000 every 6 months. Alexander leaned closer, studying the information. "Source." The woman shook her head. "Hidden behind several shell companies, but we're tracing it." Another specialist spoke up. "I've been reviewing the accident investigation. 3 witnesses gave statements, but none of them were ever contacted for follow-up questions, which is unusual for a fatal accident." He showed us the police report. The officer in charge was, coincidentally, Robert Henderson. He fast-tracked the identification process and closed the case within 48 hours. Alexander's expression hardened. "Too many coincidences," he muttered. Then, making a decision, he turned to his team. "Book the jet. We're going to Florida. I want to have a conversation with Robert Henderson." Everything moved with dizzying speed after that. Within 3 hours, we were on Alexander's private jet, flying toward Florida. I sat across from him in the luxurious cabin, still trying to process the monumental changes happening in my life. Just this morning, I've been a nobody selling homemade candies on a street corner. Now, I was flying in a private jet with a billionaire who was apparently my father, on a mission to uncover a 15-year-old conspiracy. It felt like I'd stumbled into someone else's life or a movie plot. Yet the music box resting in my hands, playing its familiar melody, anchored me to the truth. "Tell me about your life," Alexander said as we flew south. "I've missed so much." There was such genuine pain in his voice that I found myself opening up, sharing the story of my years in foster care. The struggles to finish school while working multiple jobs, the brief period of homelessness before I'd saved enough to rent my tiny apartment. I told him about discovering my talent for candy making, how creating the perfect lemon drop had become an obsession as I tried to recreate that taste from my childhood. With each revelation, his expression grew more pained, more determined. "I'll make this right," he promised. "I can't give you back those years, but I swear I'll make whoever did this pay." His intensity was almost frightening. The security specialist sitting nearby, Marcus, I learned his name, was interjected with practical information. "Henderson lives in a gated community in Sarasota. Security is minimal, but we'll need to approach carefully. If he's involved in something this big, he might have contingency plans if he's discovered." Alexander nodded. "We observe first, then determine the best approach." I want him alive and talking. I watched as they discussed surveillance techniques and extraction scenarios, feeling increasingly out of my depth. Should we be involving the police or FBI? I asked hesitantly. If there was a conspiracy to fake deaths and separate a family, isn't that a federal crime? Alexander and Marcus exchanged glances. "We don't know who else might be involved," Alexander explained gently. "If Henderson was working with someone in federal law enforcement 15 years ago, that connection might still exist. We need more information before we involve authorities." As the landscape below transitioned from mountains to coastline, Marcus received an update from the team still working in the penthouse. "Sir, We've managed to trace some of the payments to Henderson. They originated from an account connected to Westfield Industries. Alexander's face went pale. Westfield, he repeated. Are you sure? When Marcus nodded, Alexander stood abruptly, pacing the length of the jet. Westfield Industries was my main competitor 15 years ago. Their CEO, Richard Westfield, was the primary beneficiary when my company's stock plummeted after. He didn't need to finish the sentence. After he thought his family had died. So you think this Richard Westfield orchestrated everything? I asked, trying to keep up. Had us separated and made to believe each other was dead, just to gain a business advantage. It seemed both incredibly elaborate and cruelly extreme. Alexander's expression was grim as he returned to his seat. Richard Westfield was not a man who accepted defeat gracefully. We've been rivals since college. The deal I was working on would have essentially put Westfield Industries out of the global market. Billions were at stake. He shook his head. But even for Richard, this seems excessive. Marcus had been typing rapidly on his laptop. Westfield died in 2015, he reported. Heart attack on his yacht. His son, Christopher, now runs the company. He pulled up a photo of a man about my age, handsome in a polished way, with cold eyes that reminded me of a shark. Christopher was 20 when all this happened, just starting in the company under his father's mentorship. Alexander studied the image thoughtfully. He always was his father's son in every way. I wouldn't put it past him to be maintaining whatever arrangement his father started. As we began our descent into Sarasota, Alexander turned to me with concern in his eyes. Are you sure you want to be part of this? I can have Marcus take you somewhere safe while we handle Henderson. I appreciated his concern, but the suggestion that I should step aside irritated me. I've spent 15 years believing a lie, I said firmly. I deserve to hear the truth directly from the source. Besides, Henderson might respond differently to seeing me, the child he helped separate from her family. Alexander didn't look convinced, but he nodded. Stay behind me at all times, was all he said. Henderson's house was in an upscale but not ostentatious neighborhood. Single-story homes with neat lawns and community pools. Our rental car blended perfectly with the other vehicles on the quiet streets. Marcus drove past Henderson's address twice, confirming that the retired police officer appeared to be home alone. His wife died 3 years ago, Marcus reminded us. No children. Neighbors say he keeps to himself, occasionally has visits from his poker buddies on Thursdays. Today was Tuesday. The timing seemed optimal. Alexander checked his watch, then nodded to Marcus. Let's do this. We approached the front door casually, as if we were expected visitors. Alexander had changed from his business suit into more casual attire, though he still looked wealthy and imposing. I stood slightly behind him, my heart pounding so loudly I was sure everyone could hear it. Marcus positioned himself to the side, out of immediate view from the doorway. When Alexander rang the doorbell, I held my breath. After a moment, the door opened to reveal an older man with a weather-beaten face and suspicious eyes. Robert Henderson? Alexander asked pleasantly. My name is Alexander Mitchell. I believe you have information about my wife and daughter. Henderson's reaction was immediate and revealing. His face drained of color, and he attempted to slam the door shut. Alexander was faster, his foot blocking the door as his hand pushed it back open with surprising strength. We're coming inside to talk, Mr. Henderson, he said, his voice now hard as steel. You can make this easy or difficult, but one way or another, you're going to tell me what happened 15 years ago. Marcus moved swiftly to secure the perimeter, ensuring no neighbors were witnessing this confrontation, while Alexander guided me inside, never taking his eyes off the now trembling retired officer. You're supposed to be in New York, Henderson stammered as we entered his living room. How did you find her? The question confirmed our suspicions immediately. Henderson knew exactly who I was and had been part of the deception. Alexander's expression darkened further. Sit down, he ordered, pointing to an armchair. Henderson complied, his eyes darting between us. I stood silently, taking in the man who had helped destroy my family. He was older than in my foggy memories, but I recognized him now. The police officer who had told me, with practiced sympathy, that my parents were never coming back. Where is my wife? Alexander demanded, his voice dangerously quiet. Henderson flinched. I don't know, he said quickly. That wasn't part of my job. I was only responsible for the girl, making sure she stayed in the system, away from you. He glanced at me nervously. Reeves handled everything else. He was the one with the federal connections. Alexander moved closer, looming over Henderson. Who hired you? Westfield. Henderson nodded reluctantly. Richard approached me, said it was a matter of national security, that your company was selling technology to unfriendly nations. That's a lie, Alexander snapped. A convenient cover story to make you feel better about destroying a family. Henderson had the decency to look ashamed. I realized that later, after it was too late. By then, I was already compromised. Taking the money, filing false reports, I could have gone to prison. His excuses rang hollow, and I felt my own anger rising. What about my mother? I asked, speaking for the first time. Was she in the car that crashed? Henderson shook his head. There was no crash. That was all staged, burned wreckage, planted evidence. Alexander's patience was visibly wearing thin. Then where is she? He demanded again. Henderson spread his hands. I swear I don't know. Reeves separated you at the safe house. The girl went to me, but Sarah... He frowned, trying to recall details. There was talk about sending her overseas. A facility of some kind. Reeves would know, but he's dead now. Alexander grabbed Henderson by the shirt collar. What facility? Where? Henderson's face reddened. I don't know. Somewhere in Europe, I think. Reeves kept that information compartmentalized. Said it was safer for everyone. Names, Alexander growled. Give me names of everyone involved. Everyone who might know where she was taken. Henderson, now thoroughly intimidated, began listing names. Other officers, a doctor, a lawyer who'd handled the paperwork. Marcus recorded everything, already sending the information to his team for immediate investigation. As the list grew, so did my horror at the scope of the conspiracy. Dozens of people had participated in separating me from my parents, maintaining the lie for 15 years. And somewhere, possibly in Europe, my mother might still be alive, still believing her family was dead. Henderson's cooperation increased as Alexander promised immunity in exchange for full disclosure. There's a storage unit, he admitted finally. Reeves kept records of everything. Insurance, I guess, in case Westfield ever turned on him. After he died, I took the key. He shuffled to a desk drawer, producing a small key with a number tag. Everything I know about the operation is there, including maybe information about where they took Sarah. Alexander took the key, examining it carefully before handing it to Marcus. We need to secure these documents immediately. While Marcus arranged for a team to access the storage unit, Alexander continued questioning Henderson about my mother. Was she injured? Why would they keep her alive, but separate from her daughter? Henderson shifted uncomfortably. I only heard pieces, but Westfield had some kind of personal interest in her. Something about her research work before she married you. This was news to me. I'd never known my mother had been a researcher. Alexander nodded grimly. Sarah was a brilliant biochemist. We met when her lab was developing a treatment that my company was funding. Westfield tried to hire her multiple times, Alexander continued, pieces falling into place. She always refused. Her loyalty was to the research, not to corporate interests. He turned back to Henderson. Was she forced to work for Westfield? Is that why they took her? Henderson shrugged helplessly. Maybe. Like I said, Reeves handled that side of things. I was told she was being taken care of, that she was comfortable but secure. Whatever that means. The way he said it sent chills down my spine. Comfortable but secure sounded like a euphemism for luxurious captivity. Marcus returned from making his calls. Team is en route to the storage facility. They'll secure all documents and begin analysis immediately. He showed Alexander something on his phone. We've also identified a former Westfield industry security officer who might have been involved in the European operation. He's currently living in Berlin under an assumed name. Alexander nodded. Book us on the next flight to Berlin after we secure the documents from the storage unit. If Sarah is somewhere in Europe, that's our best lead. As we prepare to leave, I found myself standing face to face with Henderson. The man who had told a 7-year-old girl her parents were dead, who had placed me with abusive foster parents and monitored me for years to ensure I never discovered the truth. I want to hate him, to scream and rage at the life he'd stolen from me. Instead, I asked the question that had been burning inside me since this all began. Why? Why did you agree to do this to a child? Henderson couldn't meet my eyes. The money, at first, he admitted, then fear of being caught. It's no excuse. No, I agreed quietly. It's not. Then, thinking of all the foster children still in the system, I added, when this is over, when we find my mother, you're going to use every penny of that blood money to help children like me. Children who really don't have parents to return to. Henderson nodded, looking relieved at the opportunity for some kind of redemption. Alexander placed a hand on my shoulder, pride evident in his eyes. Let's go, he said gently. We have a storage unit to check, and then a plane to catch. It's time to find your mother. The storage unit was in a facility on the outskirts of Sarasota, climate-controlled, high security, the kind of place where secrets could remain buried for decades. Alexander's security team had already arrived and secured the perimeter when we pulled up. The unit itself was smaller than I'd expected, about the size of a walk-in closet. Marcus unlocked it, revealing stacks of boxes, filing cabinets, and a small safe in the corner. We'll need to sort through everything, Alexander said. Look for anything related to Sarah Mitchell or Project Helios. Project Helios? I asked, taking a box labeled 2009 and beginning to look through the files inside. Alexander nodded grimly. The research your mother was working on, a revolutionary cancer treatment that targeted specific genetic markers without damaging healthy cells. It was years ahead of its time. He picked up another box. If Westfield took Sarah to continue her research, there might be records of transfers to research facilities, specialized equipment purchases, anything that could help us locate her. We worked methodically, creating piles of relevant documents while Marcus photographed everything for digital analysis. After an hour of searching, Alexander suddenly went still, holding a file folder with trembling hands. I found something, he said, his voice thick with emotion. Inside was a series of quarterly reports labeled Subject SM Status Updates. Each contained clinical notes about my mother's condition, her work progress, and, most disturbingly, her continued compliance with memory modification protocols. The most recent report was dated just 3 months ago. She's alive, I whispered, tears filling my eyes as I read over Alexander's shoulder. But these reports, they've done something to her memory? Alexander's expression was a mixture of relief and fury. Cognitive recalibration, he read from one document. Subject continues to believe her family perished in 2010. Maintains productive work schedule on Helios modifications. He carefully placed the file in our critical pile, continuing to search for location details. The reports were comprehensive about my mother's mental state and research progress, but frustratingly vague about where she was being held. The breakthrough came from the safe, which Marcus managed to open after determining the combination was James Reeves' badge number. Inside were several passports, bundles of cash in various currencies, and a slim black ledger. The ledger contained coded entries that didn't immediately make sense, but among the passports was one for Sarah Winters, with my mother's photo. The passport showed multiple entry stamps for Switzerland over the years. Chateau Montverde, Marcus said suddenly, looking up from his phone where he'd been cross-referencing the coded entries from the ledger. It's a private research facility in the Swiss Alps, owned by a subsidiary of Westfield Industries. Alexander immediately called his pilot, instructing him to file a flight plan for Zurich. We leave in an hour, he told us, already packing the most crucial documents. Marcus arranged for a helicopter from Zurich to the chateau. We're not waiting. I stood frozen, trying to absorb the reality that my mother was alive, being held in a Swiss research facility, her memories of her family erased or altered. What will she remember of us? I asked quietly. Will she know me at all? Alexander paused in his frantic preparations, his expression softening as he looked at me. We'll help her remember, he promised. Whatever it takes. The flight to Switzerland was the longest 10 hours of my life, despite the luxury of Alexander's private jet. I alternated between reading through the files we'd collected, trying to understand exactly what had been done to my mother, and staring out the window at the endless darkness below. Alexander worked tirelessly, making calls to his legal team, preparing for every possible scenario we might encounter at Chateau Montverde. "We'll present ourselves as potential investors," he explained. "My team has created a cover that should get us inside. Once there, we'll need to locate your mother and evacuate her as quickly as possible." I nodded, though the plan seemed fraught with potential complications. What if she doesn't want to come with us? If she doesn't remember us and has been taught to trust Westfield? Alexander's jaw tightened. "That's why we have these," he said, holding up the file of status reports. "Proof of what they've done to her. And we have this." He gently touched the music box that hadn't left my possession since he'd given it to me. Memories can be suppressed, but rarely completely erased, especially emotional memories connected to music to loved ones. As dawn broke over the Swiss Alps, our jet began its descent into Zurich. The landscape below was breathtakingly beautiful. Pristine lakes reflecting the pink-gold light of sunrise, snow-capped mountains standing like sentinels against the sky. It seemed impossible that something as ugly as our family's story could exist in such a place. Yet as our helicopter lifted off 2 hours later, heading toward the coordinates of Chateau Montverde, I could see how the remote location would serve their purposes perfectly. Isolated, difficult to access, surrounded by natural barriers. The chateau itself appeared on the horizon. Not the medieval fortress I'd imagined, but a sleek, modern facility of glass and steel, incongruously set among the rugged mountain peaks. Solar panels glinted on the rooftops, and a private helipad waited on a plateau nearby. As we approached, I could see figures moving about the grounds, some in lab coats, others in what appeared to be security uniforms. My heart raced. Was my mother down there somewhere, unaware that her daughter and husband were about to re-enter her life after 15 years of artificial separation? We landed smoothly, greeted by a welcoming committee of 3 people: a distinguished older man in a tailored suit, a younger woman with a tablet, and a security officer maintaining a polite but watchful distance. "Mr. Remington," the older man said, stepping forward to shake Alexander's hand. My father had assumed an alias for this visit, part of our careful cover story. "Welcome to Chateau Montverde. I'm Dr. Klaus Weber, Director of Research. We're honored by your interest in our work." I stood slightly behind Alexander, introduced simply as his associate. No one gave me a second glance, just another assistant to a wealthy investor. "Perfect." Dr. Weber led us on a carefully choreographed tour of the facility, showing us laboratories with scientists working on various projects, all described in the vague terms of corporate confidentiality. I scanned every face we passed, looking for my mother, while Alexander kept our host engaged with technical questions that established our cover as legitimate investors with scientific background. "Our most promising project is our oncological research division," Weber mentioned as we entered a new wing. "Perhaps you'd be interested in seeing where we're developing the next generation of targeted therapies?" Alexander maintained his composure admirably, though I knew his heart must be racing as much as mine. "Absolutely," he replied smoothly. "I understand you have some proprietary approaches to genetic targeting?" Weber nodded enthusiastically, clearly pleased by this display of knowledge. "Indeed, our lead researcher has pioneered a method that shows remarkable specificity in clinical trials. In fact, she's presenting some findings to our board next week." He guided us toward a large laboratory at the end of the corridor. Through the glass walls, I could see several researchers in white coats, bent over microscopes or computer screens. And then I saw her. Older, her dark hair now streaked with silver, but unmistakably my mother. She was standing at a whiteboard, making notations as she spoke to a younger colleague. Even her gestures were familiar. The way she tucked her hair behind her ear when concentrating, the slight tilt of her head when listening. I grabbed Alexander's arm involuntarily, my fingers digging into his sleeve. He covered my hand with his, a silent acknowledgement. "We found her." After 15 years, after being told she was dead, after believing I was an orphan. There was my mother, alive and apparently well. Weber, noticing nothing amiss, continued his presentation. Dr. Winters has been with us for over a decade. Her work is nothing short of revolutionary. He pressed a button, and the glass walls turned opaque. Unfortunately, her current experiment is at a critical stage. Perhaps we can meet her at lunch? Alexander nodded, though I could feel the tension radiating from him. Is Dr. Winters available for consultations with potential partners? He asked casually. We'd be very interested in hearing directly about her methodology. Weber seemed pleased by the question. I'm sure that can be arranged, he said. She typically dines in the executive cafeteria at 1300 hours. The next 2 hours were excruciating as we continued our tour while waiting for the appointed lunch hour. Alexander expertly guided our conversation towards security protocols, noting camera placements, guard rotations, and access points. I followed silently, processing the shock of seeing my mother and planning our next move. When Weber finally led us to the executive cafeteria, an elegant space with panoramic mountain views, I spotted her immediately, sitting alone at a corner table with a salad and a scientific journal. Weber began to approach her, but Alexander smoothly intercepted him. Actually, Dr. Weber, before we meet your star researcher, I had some questions about your funding structure. As Alexander deftly pulled Weber aside, I made my move, walking casually toward my mother's table as if heading to the beverage station nearby. My hands were shaking so badly, I had to clasp them together. What would I say to her? How do you introduce yourself to your own mother who doesn't remember you exist? I had rehearsed dozens of approaches during our flight, but now, facing the actual moment, my mind went blank. In the end, simplicity won out. I stopped beside her table, took a deep breath, and said, "Excuse me, Dr. Winters. I believe this belongs to you." I placed the music box gently on the table beside her journal. She looked up, first with mild annoyance at being interrupted, then with curiosity as she saw the music box. "I think you're mistaken," she said politely. "That's not mine." Her voice, so familiar and yet so strange to hear again, sent a wave of emotion through me that I struggled to control. "Are you sure?" I asked, opening the lid. The melody began to play, the lullaby she and my father had sung to me countless times. It's quite old. A family heirloom, perhaps. Something flickered in her eyes, confusion, the faintest hint of recognition. But she shook her head. "No, I don't have family heirlooms. I lost my family many years ago." "That's what they told you," I said quietly, taking the seat across from her. "But it's not true." She frowned, clearly uncomfortable now. "I don't know what you're talking about, and I'm busy with my lunch." She started to gather her things, but I reached across the table, gently touching her wrist where a faint heart-shaped birthmark, identical to mine, was visible. "We have the same birthmark," I said, showing her my wrist. "Mother and daughter, a genetic legacy. My name is not Emily Remington, as they told you when I came in. My name is your name, Mitchell. I'm your daughter." Her face paled, her eyes widening in shock and disbelief. "My daughter is dead," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "She died with her father in a car accident in 2010. I shook my head, maintaining eye contact. "No, that's what Westfield and James Reeves wanted you to believe. They separated us, you, me, and Dad. They've kept you here, working on Project Helios, while altering your memories to make you forget us." I slid the file of status reports across the table. "This is proof. These are reports on your treatment here. Read them." Her hands trembled as she opened the file, skimming the clinical notes about her own memory modification protocols. I could see the moment realization began to dawn. The horror, the disbelief, then the first spark of anger. "This can't be," she began, but then her eyes caught something across the cafeteria. I turned to see Alexander walking toward us, having managed to disengage from Weber. My mother's face went completely white. "Alex," she whispered, rising unsteadily to her feet. "But you're dead. You died in the accident." "No, Sarah," he said, his voice breaking as he reached our table. "They lied to us both. They told me you and our daughter had died. I've been searching for you for 15 years. The music box continued to play its gentle melody as my parents stared at each other, 15 years of engineered separation hanging between them. Then my mother's hand went to her mouth, a choked sound escaping her. "The lullaby," she whispered. "You used to sing it." Her eyes darted to me, truly seeing me for the first time. You used to sing it to her every night. The moment hung suspended between us. My mother's awakening recognition, my father's overwhelming emotion, my own heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst from my chest. Then security alarms began blaring throughout the facility. Dr. Weber was speaking urgently into his phone across the cafeteria, gesturing in our direction. "They know," Alexander said grimly. "We need to move now." He took my mother's hand. "Sarah, I know this is overwhelming, but we need to leave immediately. These people have been keeping you prisoner. Will you trust us?" My mother's expression shifted from confusion to determination, years of suppressed truth fighting to the surface. "The headaches," she murmured. "The treatments every month. They told me they were boosting my immune system." She looked at the file again, then back at us. "The dreams I've had, of a little girl with a music box, of a man singing." She squared her shoulders suddenly. "I have a private lab on the 3rd floor. We can exit through there. There's a maintenance elevator that bypasses main security." She gathered the file, her journal, and the still-playing music box. "Follow me. Act normal until we reach the stairwell." We walked casually across the cafeteria, Alexander placing himself between us and Weber, who was now speaking frantically into his phone. Security personnel were beginning to converge on the building entrances, but none had approached us directly yet. My mother swiped her access card at a side door, leading us into a utility corridor. "This way," she whispered. "We need to hurry. Once Weber checks the security logs, he'll see I've accessed this area." We followed her through a maze of corridors, up an emergency stairwell, and finally to a laboratory door marked as Winters, authorized personnel only. Inside, the lab was pristine and clearly state-of-the-art. My mother moved quickly to a computer terminal, typing rapidly. "I'm downloading my research," she explained. "I won't leave 15 years of work behind for Westfield to profit from." Alexander placed a call to Marcus, instructing him to bring the helicopter to a service road behind the facility. I stood nervously by the door, watching for any sign of pursuit. "How long will the download take?" I asked. My mother glanced at the progress bar. 3 minutes. Then we need to get to the maintenance elevator at the end of the hall. It leads directly to the loading dock. As the files transferred to a portable drive, my mother studied me openly for the first time. "You have my birthmark," she said softly, touching her own wrist. "And your father's eyes." She reached out hesitantly, her fingers brushing my cheek. "I've dreamed of you. All these years, I've had dreams of a little girl growing up, becoming a young woman. I thought they were just fantasies, my mind creating the daughter I'd lost." Her voice broke. "They stole so much from us." Before I could respond, her computer beeped, the download complete. She grabbed the drive, then led us to a closet at the back of the lab. "Service uniforms," she explained. "Put these on." Disguised in maintenance coveralls, we navigated the service corridors of Chateau Montverde with my mother leading the way. She moved with certainty, clearly familiar with these back routes, while explaining in hushed tones what she remembered. The treatments were monthly. An injection they claimed was an immune booster for working in the lab. Now I understand it was some kind of memory suppressant, keeping me compliant. She paused at a junction, checking for staff before continuing. "I always had these dreams afterward, vivid memories that felt real, but contradicted what I thought I knew. They told me it was a side effect of the medication." The loading dock was mercifully empty when we arrived, the security focus apparently concentrated on the main entrances. Through a service door, we could see the helicopter waiting on a maintenance road about 100 yards away. "We'll need to cross that open space," Alexander said, pointing to the stretch between the building and the tree line. "Once we're out, they'll spot us immediately." He checked his watch. "Marcus says he has a diversion planned on the north side in exactly 2 minutes. When it happens, we run. Don't stop for anything." "Right on schedule," A series of explosions rocked the north wing of the facility. Nothing destructive, Alexander assured us. Just smoke devices and sound charges designed to draw attention and resources away from our escape route. We seized the moment, dashing across the open ground toward the waiting helicopter. I held my mother's hand tightly, feeling her squeeze back with surprising strength. We were nearly to the tree line when shouts erupted behind us. A quick glance back revealed security personnel pouring onto the loading dock, some already raising weapons. "Down!" Alexander shouted, pushing us forward as shots rang out. We scrambled the final distance to the helicopter, Marcus laying down, covering fire from the open door. I helped my mother aboard, then turned to see Alexander stumbling the last few steps, his hand pressed to his side where a growing stain darkened his coveralls. "Dad!" I screamed, rushing back to help him. With Marcus's assistance, we pulled him into the helicopter as it lifted off, bullets pinging off its reinforced hull. "I'm fine," Alexander insisted through gritted teeth. "Just a graze. Get us out of here, Marcus." As the helicopter rose above the tree line, banking sharply to put the mountain between us and Chateau Montverde, my mother took control of the situation with remarkable composure. "Let me see," she commanded, examining Alexander's wound with professional detachment. Not just a graze, but not life-threatening either. The bullet passed through clean. She grabbed a first aid kit, applying pressure dressings with practiced efficiency. "You're lucky. 2 inches to the left, and we'd be having a very different conversation." Despite her clinical tone, I could see tears forming in her eyes as she worked, the reality of nearly losing her husband again clearly hitting her. Once she'd stabilized Alexander and the immediate danger was behind us, the emotional weight of our reunion finally descended. The 3 of us, father, mother, daughter, separated for 15 years by corporate greed and criminality, now together in the confined space of a helicopter fleeing over the Swiss Alps. My mother sat between us, holding my hand in Alexander's, tears streaming down her face. "All this time," she whispered, "all these years, they made me believe you were dead. They made me think I was alone in the world." Alexander brought her hand to his lips. "Never again," he promised. "We'll never be separated again." 3 months later, I stood in the garden of Alexander's. No, our family's mansion, watching as my mother carefully tended to her new herb garden. The Swiss authorities had raided Chateau Montverde based on the evidence we'd provided, arresting Dr. Weber and several others involved in the illegal detention and medical experimentation. Christopher Westfield was currently awaiting trial in New York, his father's empire crumbling as investigators uncovered decades of corporate crimes. My mother's recovery had been remarkable. Once freed from the monthly treatments, her true memories had begun returning in waves, sometimes overwhelming her with their intensity. My father approached, his wound long healed, carrying a tray with lemonade and my specialty lavender lemon drops. "How is she today?" he asked softly, setting the tray on the garden table. I smiled. "Good." She remembered our trip to France when I was 6, described the hotel room in perfect detail. These moments of reclaimed memory were precious to all of us, pieces of our family history being restored day by day. The doctors had been cautiously optimistic, explaining that while the drugs had suppressed her memories, the emotional connections had remained intact, providing pathways for recovery. The media frenzy had eventually died down, though her story had captivated the world. The billionaire whose family had been stolen, the groundbreaking scientist kept captive for her research, the daughter who had grown up believing she was an orphan. We'd granted one exclusive interview, using the platform to highlight the plight of foster children and establish a foundation supporting reunification of separated families. Alexander had kept his promise that no child should suffer as I had, dedicating substantial resources to reforming the system that had failed to protect me. Mother looked up, seeing us watching her, and smiled, that radiant smile I'd only known from faded photographs for most of my life. She wiped her hands on her gardening apron and joined us at the table. "The lavender is doing wonderfully," she said, taking a lemon drop and savoring it. "Just like I remember teaching you to make all those years ago." She reached for the music box that was never far from her these days, opening it to let the familiar melody play. "Your father used to sing this to you every night," she said, a regular ritual of reinforcing returning memories. As twilight descended on our garden, the three of us sat together, sharing memories both old and new, healing the wounds of our forced separation. My father reached across the table, taking both our hands in his. "I never gave up," he said quietly, "even when everyone told me to accept that you were gone. Something in my heart refused to believe it." My mother squeezed his hand. "And I never truly forgot you," she replied. "They could suppress my memories, but not the love." I looked at my parents, marveling at the strength of a connection that had withstood 15 years of deliberate separation, of lives rebuilt on lies. In my pocket was the business card for my tiny candy stand, now closed forever. I would never again need to sell sweets on a street corner to survive. Yet I wouldn't trade that experience, difficult as it had been, because without it, without my stubborn determination to recreate my father's lemon drops, our family might never have found its way back together. Sometimes the sweetest reunions come from the bitterest separations. As the music box played its familiar lullaby in the gathering darkness, I silently thanked the universe for the chance meeting that had brought my father to my candy stand that day, and the whispered words that had begun our journey back to each other. "You used to sing this to me, Dad." What an incredible journey we've taken together through this story of loss, perseverance, and reunion. The power of family bonds that can transcend even the most calculated separation reminds us of what truly matters in life. Have you ever wondered what memories from your childhood might be anchoring you to your true path, even when you're unaware of their significance? This tale of a father and daughter reunited through a simple piece of candy shows us how even the smallest connections can lead to profound discoveries. What forgotten melodies or tastes from your past might be waiting to guide you home? Perhaps there are connections in your life that seem coincidental but are actually meaningful bridges to your authentic self or to loved ones you've lost touch with. The courage shown by each character, the daughter who never gave up creating her special candy, the father who never stopped searching, and the mother who fought through artificial barriers in her mind, challenges us all. Where in your life could you show similar persistence? What dreams or relationships deserve that level of dedication and faith? Remember that sometimes our greatest strengths emerge from our deepest wounds. The protagonist's difficult childhood ultimately gave her the resilience and skill she needed for the moment that would change everything. How have your own challenges prepared you for opportunities you couldn't have foreseen? I encourage you to listen to those quiet whispers of memory and connection in your own life. That familiar scent, that song that moves you to tears for reasons you can't explain, that recipe handed down through generations. These aren't just nostalgic trinkets, but potential keys to profound meaning and connection. Will you take a moment today to reconnect with someone important from your past? Or perhaps create something meaningful that might one day be a bridge to someone you love? The choice to pursue these deeper connections could lead to your own extraordinary reunion story. If this journey has touched your heart or sparked reflection, I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Have you experienced a meaningful reunion in your life? Do you have questions about nurturing family bonds across time and distance? Your stories and insights enrich our community. Don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss another story that might just change how you see the world or yourself. Until next time, remember that sometimes the sweetest discoveries begin with the courage to taste a memory.